Ruchim Aboyim. Welcome to our overview of Masechtas Makkos. With this Masechta, the Gemara continues to discuss the subject of judgment and punishment of criminal matters by Bezdin. This small Masechta consists of just 3 parakim, with each parak discussing a distinctively separate topic. The first parak discusses the laws of Edus Sheker, witnesses who falsely testify, to Bezdin, specifically Edim Zayman. The second parak discusses the laws of Gullus, the punishment of exile imposed on someone who killed another person inadvertently. And the third and final parak discusses Makkos, the punishment of lashes one is given by Bezdin for being over most averis b'mezid. Edim Zayman. The Torah in Parsha Shoftim writes in reference to Edim who testify in front of Bezdin, V'dorshu hashoftim heitiv, and the judges should cross-examine the witnesses. V'hine ed sheker ha'ed, and when they come to the conclusion that sheker ana ba'achiv, they're lying about their brother, and as Rashi Chumash explains, the drisha of this pasuk is not referring to the drisha of the first set of Edim who testified. They already went through a drisha v'chakira earlier. But rather the Torah is referring to the second set of Edim who come later, lahazim es rishayim, to testify against the first set of Edim by saying, imanu hayisa, you, meaning the first set of Edim, were with us elsewhere on that day, and therefore you could not possibly have heard or seen what actually happened. And as to the difference between regular Edei Sheker and Edim Zayman, is that Edei Sheker testify falsely about the event, whether the event happened or not, while Edim Zayman testify against the actual witnesses themselves. As the Mishnah Daf Hey teaches, Ein Edim Nasim Zayman ad sheyizamu es atzman, and say, Hari'atem hayisam imanu oisai hayon b'makom pleni. The two of you could not have been witnesses to the event, since you were elsewhere with us at that time. About such a scenario, the Torah writes, V'asisim loy kasha zamam lasas la'achiv. It is a mitzvah aseh to do to them, in other words, to punish these Edim Zaymin, kasha zamam lasas, with the same punishment they conspired to punish the defendant. So now, if this was a typical case where we have 2 conflicting sets of Edim, and Bezdin is unable to determine which set is telling the truth, the halach would be that they're both simply dismissed. However, in the case of Hazama, the Torah teaches that the second set of Edim are to be believed. And the first set of Edim are not only disqualified, but are given the same punishment they had intended to cause the defendant, as the Torah writes. V'asisim loy kasha zamam lasas la'achiv. And you shall do to them that which they intended to do to their brother, the defendant. And the general rule, with a few minor exceptions, are, if they intended for the defendant to pay money, they will now have to pay that amount to the defendant. If they intended for the defendant to receive malchus, they would now receive malchus. And if they intended for the defendant to receive the death penalty, they will now receive the same death penalty, with a few minor exceptions. Our Masechta actually begins by focusing on these exceptions. Zok the Mishnah, Keitzere Edim Nasim Zayman. How are witnesses punished for being Zayman when they cannot be given the same punishment they intended to inflict on the defendant? And the Mishnah goes on to list certain cases where, for various reasons, the exact same punishment is not applicable. Later in the parak, the Gemara discusses other unique halachas regarding Edim Zayman as well as Edim in general. Ein Edim Zayman neheragin at shegomer hadin. Only if the hazama took place after the court handed down its final verdict, but not if the second set of Edim came during the trial itself. In other words, if the Edim Azimim testified during the deliberations and before the final verdict, the first set of Edim are not put to death. Another very unique din legabe Edim Zayman is as Beribi teaches, Tanya Beribi Omer, Loy hargu neragin. The only time that Edim Zayman would actually be killed by Bezdin for falsely testifying is if the defendant was not yet killed on account of their false testimony. However, hargu in neragin, if the second set of Edim came after the defendant was already put to death, then the Edim Zayman are not put to death. A general rule that applies to all Edis. The Torah writes, Api shnaim Edim ashleisha Edim yumas hanes. Based on this pasuk, the Mishnah Daf Hey famously asks, if the threshold to create a valid set of Edim is 2 witnesses, then of course 3 witnesses would also be good. Ella lahakesh shleisha lishnayim. The Torah is teaching us is that a set of 3 witnesses is no better or stronger or more believable than the set of two witnesses. Ma shleisha mezimin es hashnayim, af hashnayim yuzamo es hashleisha. So in other words, just as a group of three witnesses is obviously believed to render a smaller group of two into zaymin, so to an edim comprised of two witnesses can make a larger group of three or even more witnesses into edim zaymin. As the Mishnah goes on to teach, just as a group of 100 witnesses are called edim, so to a group of two witnesses are also called edim. In other words, just because one set of edim is comprised of a larger group of people does not make their edis any more believable in Bezdin than a set of edim comprised of just two witnesses. With the second parak, the Gemara begins to discuss the punishment of galus, exile. In Parshas Mishpatim, the Torah writes, Makkos v'meis mois yumas. If one strikes a man intentionally and he dies, he shall be put to death. However, but if he had no intention of killing the other man, but yet Hashem caused that man to die by his hand, Hashem says, I will provide for you a designated place to which you can flee and where you will receive atonement as well as be protected from anyone wishing to harm you in revenge. This designated place is called an Ir Miklat. So by forcing an unintentional killer to go into Galus, the Torah is in a sense accomplishing a dual purpose. First is exile, where the killer is punished in that he must leave his home and go into exile, go live in a strange city away from family and friends. And the other purpose is to protect him from the Goyal Hadam, a vengeful relative. For so long as the unintentional killer moves out and stays in any of the 6 cities designated as Ir Miklat, the Goyal Hadam may not touch him. However, should he wander outside of the Ir Miklat at any point in time, he would put his life in danger of being killed by the Goyal Hadam, who is permitted to avenge the death of his relative. As the pasuk says in Bamidbar Lamed Hey, Goyal Hadam yamis as Ritzach befigui by. Shagig. Only someone who was a true shagig and killed unintentionally is subject to galus. However, if the killer was a shagig karav la'inus, where the killer's action was not at all expected to harm anyone, he is not held responsible and does not require any punishment. And also the Goyal Adam may not take revenge by killing him. On the other end of the spectrum, if the killer was a shagig karav la'mezid, he did a dangerous act without taking proper precautions and it led to someone's death. His sin is too severe to be atoned for by just galus. Rather, his punishment is left in the hands of Hashem. And in this case, the Goyal Adam may avenge the killer even if the killer runs to an Ir Miklat. Once he's subject to galus, he must remain there as long as the Kohen Gadol is alive. Once the Kohen Gadol died, the killer was free to leave the Ir Miklat and return to his home, and he no longer needed to fear retribution from the Goyal Adam, since the Goyal Adam was no longer permitted to avenge the death of his relative. The third and final parak discusses the punishment of Makkos, of lashes. The 613 mitzvahs min HaTorah are divided into 2 categories. Mitzvahs aseh, of which there are 248, such as the mitzvah to blow the shofar Rosh Hashanah, or eating matzahs on Pesach, and mitzvahs leis aseh, of which there are 365, such as the prohibition to eat non-kosher food. The Torah writes in Parshas Kiseitze, a reference to one who was judged by Bezdin to have violated a lois aseh, v'haya im bin ha'koisar rasha, and it will be that the wicked one, meaning the one who is over b'lois aseh, is liable to lashes, v'pilui ha'shefet v'yikol lefanav. The judge shall cast him down and strike him, kidei rishasa b'mispar, according to his wickedness by a specific count, arbam yakenu lo yosef. He shall receive 40 lashes, but no more. As Bezdin must be careful not to go above that count, pen yosef la koisel elo makar rabba, lest he strike him an additional blow beyond these 40, v'niklo chichel einecha, and your brother will be degraded before your eyes. The next pasuk states, lo yisachsem shor b'dishay. You should not muzzle an ox while it is threshing. Now, while on the surface this pasuk seems to be out of place, however, lamanu she'en loikin. The Chum teaches that ella aloisa sehadoima lalav shel chasima, that by juxtaposing this pasuk alongside the laws of Makkos, this pasuk is teaching that Makkos is only given for a lavin that are similar to the lav of leisachsim shor b'dishay, only for a lois aseh, but not for bittul aseh, only to transgress a lois aseh, a negative commandment, such as not to muzzle your ox while threshing, but not for bittul asay, not fulfilling a mitzvah asay obligation. And only for a lav sheyesh by maisa, where the lav involves a physical action, such as applying the muzzle onto the animal. However, a lav she'im by maisa, where the lav can be transgressed even while not doing any action, in loikin lav, he does not get malchus. Also, we do not give malchus for a lav hanitig la'aseh, a transgression that can be undone by fulfilling an attached positive commandment, such as if one stole an item from his neighbor. Rather than being punished with malchus, he's commanded to return the stolen item. And also, he does not receive malchus for a lav sheniten la'asharas mises bezdin. If in addition to being obligated to receive malchus, one is also subject to receiving the death penalty, he does not receive malchus. This is learned out from the pasuk of Kedei Rishasai. While malchus, as a punishment, is indeed a harsh punishment, as we see how the Gemara on Daf Chav goes into the great and harsh detail, nevertheless, the Gemara also teaches how the malchus punishment was meted out with great compassion, being extremely careful that the person be evaluated as to how much punishment he's able to withstand, be it physically and also emotionally. If he is deemed too weak physically to withstand the full complement of 39 lashes, the amount is reduced to the amount he could withstand. And also, if the person suffers great humiliation while receiving the lashes, such as soiling himself during the proceedings, he's immediately dismissed on account of his being humiliated. As the Torah writes, "V'niklo achicha leinecha," that throughout the process you must remember that the one who is being punished is indeed your brother, and that once he has received atonement through malchus, he's to be treated by everyone as an equal, as a brother. Our Masechta closes out with two beautiful stories about how Rabbi Akiva, with his great insight, consoled his colleagues as they visited Yerushalayim and observed the bitter sight of the Beis Hamikdash, which lay in ruins. B'lashon hazeh amru lei. And after Rabbi Akiva consoles them, they answer with these famous words: Akiva nichamtanu, Akiva nichamtanu. V'yiratzain, that we should indeed be zeicha to be consoled by experiencing the Geula Shalema along with the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, B'mheira v'yameinu amen.